Hey there friends and enemies, JoPaWrites here again, and today we got some pretty massive Destiny 2 news, including a collaboration I don't think anyone saw coming. We got a preview of not only the seasonal artifact and its perks for next season, but also the Season of the Wish ability and exotic armor changes that are incoming. And then finally, the Fire Team Finder beta. This is the in-game LFG that they've promised, but it's not fully rolling out as Season of the Witch launches, so I'll explain all of that in just a second. But first off, we did get a collaboration with the Witcher franchise, and these armor sets look pretty sick. Keep in mind they will likely only be available for silver instead of bright dust or earnable, anything like that. I know there's going to be some complaints about this, but that's just how collaborations work, so I'm unsurprised that's going to be the direction. And like I said, these armor pieces look really good, so if you're a fan of the Witcher franchise and Destiny 2, this is a perfect crossover. Now, next up, they have the artifact preview. This one is pretty interesting. There are some stasis perks on here that I don't think are going to completely change the thought process, the opinion of stasis in the game right now. However, I can see some pretty interesting builds being made, especially when you look at Shadebinder Warlock. Could be phenomenal next season, especially when you consider it's already really good at crowd control. So things like the Hail the Storm, so shattering encased targets and stasis crystals deals increased damage. Shattering a stasis crystal releases shards of ice that damage and slow targets. That's one example. Pillar of Ice is another good one. Killing an encased combatant small stasis crystals. Essentially, you're just going to be spamming those stasis crystals overall. So, again, things that could be interesting there. We've got Anti-Barrier Sidearm, Unstoppable Hand Cannon, Unstoppable Bow, Overload Auto Rifle, Overload Pulse, and then also Overload Rocket Launcher, which could be interesting. The final thing that I want to talk about is a couple of the perks that are going to be synergizing with the Season of the Wish armor, like Wished into Being. While your super is nearly fully charged, ability final blows spawn orbs of power. Wearing Season of the Wish armor decreases super amount threshold. So that's pretty interesting. We also got the return of Solo Operative, so if you're looking forward to soloing a dungeon or something like that, that will really come in handy as well. Now, as far as the ability changes incoming, they talk a lot about a bunch of different things. First off, they talk about how some of the perks are just overtuned, especially ones that should be on longer cooldowns, but because of all the different ways you can customize things with aspects and fragments and armor and everything in the game right now, it makes those cooldown numbers relatively obsolete. Like, you don't really have to worry about them. So now longer cooldown abilities are now going to take longer. They're not going to benefit as much from some of those changes. So for example, under the new system, a perk that grants a base value of 10% grenade energy on activation results in a cooldown reduction of 6.4 seconds for Firebolt Grenade and results in a cooldown reduction of 7.6 seconds for Lightning Grenade. So that's the adjustment there, where shorter cooldown abilities are going to benefit more from these changes because the other ones are just going to take a lot longer. So I think this will be very interesting. Again, there's a tight balance between power creep and not making this power fantasy space magic game fun, and I think it's hard to walk that line. And I know people are going to be upset with some of these changes because there were a bunch of nerfs in here as well. So they're nerfing Woven Mail, they're also nerfing Restoration, and I think people are going to, I don't think they're going to be that drastic changes from what I'm seeing. Yes, it'll hurt, but I don't think it's going to be anything that's going to matter outside of the hardest difficulty content in the game, GMs and the like. Otherwise, survivability is such that I don't think this is going to be a massive game changer. They also nerfed Devour and Feed the Void a little bit as well, so keep that in mind going into next season as you're testing out your build. They also got rid of the sprint to slide melee. Essentially, when you slide and shoot and then are able to instantly melee right after, like when you can slide, shotgun, shoulder charge, that is going away. So specifically for PvP, I know that was a problem. A lot of people were frustrated with that, so I'm not surprised that is changing. But In conjunction with that, they also buffed Tempest Strike because they said it was falling behind. So increased base damage for that one, which is nice. Now, here are some of the major nerfs that we are seeing. For the Titan, they are nerfing dramatically Banner of War, as well as the Throwing Hammer and Sol Invictus. Now, for me, I think Banner of War is still going to be very good. You're going to have to defeat more enemies to keep the level of Banner of War up, and the values depend largely on the type of target defeated. For fixed an issue where unpowered swords were being granted a damage boost by Banner of War. So that's pretty straightforward. I don't think it's a massive change. I think Banner of War was too easy mode overall. The Throwing Hammer one, though, now when you pick it up, it now returns melee energy over 1.4 seconds rather than instantly. So there is a cooldown, essentially, when you're throwing your hammer and picking it back up. So I think they also increased projectile tracking strength by about 20%. This is going to help people, I think, more on console overall. Then we got Sol Invictus, reduced maximum sunspot duration from 20 seconds to 12 seconds. That is a massive nerf, in my opinion, and it's going to be hard to change that. They also increased the base cooldown times for Well of Radiance and Ward of Dawn, another pain point in PvP, and I don't think it really matters too much in PvE. You can get your Well of Radiance back pretty quickly with the right build in PvE anyway. It's not going to matter. And Ward of Dawn hasn't really seen a lot of usage lately in PvE, so I don't think that's going to be a huge difference. As far as the future of Stasis, they talk about how they're changing around the stat penalties, for example, of Whisper and Hadrons. They're removing the -10 strength penalty. Same thing with Whisper of Impetus. Now provides +10 resilience. So they're going to adjust those things, which aren't major changes, but are helpful overall. And then they just go through and talk about how Hunters, they're buffing the Withering Blade and also Winter Shroud. And then Titans, they're buffing Shiver Strike. Now slows players on hit, a behavior previously removed. Fix an issue where Shiver Strike will not function with the melee Kickstart Armor mod. Also, Glacial Quake now freezes nearby players on cast once again. And then on cast freeze impulse size versus players has been reduced from 8 meters to 6 meters. That's going to be good for PvP specifically. Howl of the Storm fixed an issue where Howl of the Storm was not consistently freezing targets in contact with the created Stasis Crystal. That's good. And then Warlocks, they buffed Frost Pulse, Penumbral Blast, as well as some of the Glacial Grenades and Cold Snap Grenades, all that kind of good stuff. So I think overall, some of these changes are nice, but I don't know if they're enough to push Stasis into the meta fully, but we'll have to wait and see once we get hands-on with these builds. I think it's one of those situations where you see these numbers on paper, they might not sound like a lot, but when you test it out and when you get the right artifacts and everything going, it could be really, really nice. So overall, I think Stasis is one that I won't expect to dominate the meta next season, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does challenge for one of those top spots, especially when you're talking, like I said, Shadebinder for the Warlock. So a new Stasis keyword is coming called Frost Armor, aimed at addressing player feedback regarding survivability, additional tuning changes and reworks to existing Stasis fragments, and additional behavior to the harvest aspects. Those are coming down the line, but not quite at the launch of Season 23. So tune in next week for the full patch notes. I'm excited about that. And then we get into the upcoming exotic armor changes. There wasn't as many of these as I would have expected. They buffed Shards of Galanor, they buffed Ophidia Spaith, and Stompies, they rebuffed that for the Hunter, as well as Mechanier's Trick Sleeves is going to be crazy next season, I believe. I wouldn't be surprised if that one's really, really good. They also buffed the Bombardiers, Triton Vice, and then Celestial Nighthawk. So overall, a lot of solar changes for the Hunter, which I think is good because that was falling a little bit behind. And I wouldn't be surprised, again, if that rises up the list. As for the Titan, my favorite change was the Severance Enclosure. Increased size and damage of the explosion. Kills with the Exotics explosion will now trigger an additional explosion. So that could be a ton of fun, and I'm looking forward to getting hands on. Peregrine Greaves, you now airborne for a brief period of time before the exotic effects will apply. I think that's fair enough. I've been using Peregrine a lot. You'll see it in the gameplay that I'm using. I really love Peregrine Greaves. But then in PvE, damaging champions, tormentors, or mini bosses with a shoulder charge further increase damage and refunds your melee energy. So it could be a nice little build with that overall. They also updated Wormgod Caress, especially with melee and glaive melee damage. I really hope that we see a melee meta with different builds next season, but we'll have to see. Ash and Wake fusion grenades now stun unstoppables. They put the glaive damage back in the Syntheseps, but also reduce the PV surrounded melee damage bonus, so that's interesting. Precious Scars kills with weapons matching your subclass now apply restoration. Again, not a bad change. I think Precious Scars is a bit underrated. Warlock, they buffed Ballador's Wrathweavers, so now when you cast a Frost Pulse Rift, nearby allies gain a tier 2 stasis surge weapon bonus for 10 seconds in PvE and 5 in PvP. Also a 50 HP overshield, which is kind of crazy. That could be really, really nice. This was one that I don't think we used barely at all. Apotheosis Veil, casting super now grants Cure. Tier 3, which is nice. Fellwinter's Helm, move the size of the weakening burst and duration. Weaken up 1 tier. Constant Armlets, melee kills now grant Cure Tier 3 and Restoration Tier 1. And then they change around the Aeon Cult exotics as well. All of these being reworked a bit to essentially do additional things to what they were doing before, which I think is good. They also did some armor mod changes where like Heavy-Handed Firepower and Reaper now have a 10-second cooldown for generating orb of power. That's pretty massive. I think that's going to be a big change. Reaper also requires a kill to be secured within 10 seconds of using your class ability. And then melee kickstart, grenade kickstart, and utility kickstart now provides plus 16 and plus 45 ability energy. Momentum transfer, they changed up. Outreach and bomber, they changed. And so, yeah, overall, lots of changes there. And then finally, the Fire Team Finder is not going to be fully active once next season launches. They're going to do a preview with a raid for 1 day, and then after they do the preview, they're going to have it in beta after that for a little bit as well. And then so the beta period begins in December, pending stress test results. Full release targeting late January, which means it'll be before the final shape, whether it's delayed or not. So overall, Fireteam Finder sounds interesting. Lots of crazy changes overall. I'm looking forward to getting hands-on with all of it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Helps me out tremendously. Shows you want to see more Destiny 2 content from me going forward. Lots of information here. I'll link the TWID in the description down below. Let me know if you are excited about Season of the Wish or not. My name is JoPa. I hope you have a good one. I'll catch you all later.